Greetings and salutations, third graders. Mrs. Licky asked me to make a video demonstrating brass instruments for you today. Because of COVID, I can't play a brass instrument in the same room that you are, so I decided to make this video. We're going to talk about a bunch of different brass instruments today. Brass instruments have been around for a long time. Some of the earliest examples of brass instruments that go back thousands of years would be a conch shell with the end of it cut off, or a ram's horn called a shofar that's sometimes played in Jewish temples on holidays. A brass instrument is any instrument usually made from brass, but some of the ones I'll show you today are silver plated. A brass instrument is any instrument that makes the sound by going with your lips. That becomes on a mouthpiece, and when you put the mouthpiece on the instrument, that sounds like There's a famous quote by conductor Richard Strauss: "Never look at the trombone section, it only encourages them." That is a joke because brass instruments tend to be loud. And conductors and string players who have to be right in front of brass players often don't like that. Brass players love it. We like to play loud. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different brass instruments today. Trumpets that come in many different sizes and variations. I'm going to show you 3 of them today. Horns, both French horns, both single and double. Trombones, tenor and bass, I'm going to show you today. Baritones and euphoniums, which are little tubas, sort of. I'm going to show you a couple of different tubas. And lastly, I'm going to show you a marching brass instrument. First, let's start with the trumpet. This is the trumpet. It has 3 valves. This trumpet's pretty similar to the one that Langley School students play, except I have a fancier mouthpiece, and I have a leather covering for my 3 valves. Okay. I understand that you are listening to Leroy Anderson. Here's a piece of his. To get those fast notes, a trumpet player will go tuk-tuk-tuk, because it's too hard to single tongue tu-tu-tu-tu-tu. To get it fast enough, we go tuk-tuk-tuk. So this is the trumpet. It has piston valves, which means the valves go up and down. I'll show you some other instruments later that have rotary valves. This is another instrument similar to the trumpet. It's called a cornet. A cornet is very similar to the trumpet, except the trumpet has what we call a cylindrical bore, which means that the tubing stays about the same length until the very end. The cornet is different. It has what we call a conical bore, a cone-shaped bore. The bore starts very thin, and as it goes through the cornet, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger all the way through. It gives it a slightly more mellow sound. The next member of the trumpet family that I want to show you is this instrument. It's called a flugelhorn. Flugelhorns started out in Germany, but now they're played in American jazz, mostly. They're also played in British-style brass bands. You might notice that my flugelhorn has 4 valves. That's to help me play lower, so that I can play down almost to trombone range. So those are the three main instruments in the trumpet group. Next, we're going to talk about horns. This is a French horn. Now, technically, because of translations from other languages, the French horn, excuse me, is actually English, and the English horn is actually French. It's a long story. This particular horn is what we call a single horn. It has one set of tubes. I'm going to show you a double horn in a minute that has a thumb valve and an extra set of tubes. This is what I would start a Langley horn player on. Typically, I don't start beginners on horn because it is a little harder than trumpet and trombone. They would start typically on trumpet and switch to horn later. Horns were hundreds of years ago used for military, like bugles, and they were used for hunting, like, hey, I found the fox. Now, when they're played inside in an orchestra or a band, that's considered a little bright and a little loud, so we put our hand in the bell. And the horn's bell is odd because it faces the opposite direction of the audience. So that's the French horn. Let me show you a double French horn. The high notes are very close together on a single French horn. So they found that by putting two sets of tubing on a French horn that you can switch back and forth, the high notes are easier. This is a double horn. You can see all the extra tubes on it, right? It's a lot of plumbing there. It also has this thumb valve that switches from the big set of tubes on the front to the littler set of tubes down there in the middle. That allows us to play the high notes easier. Okay, that's the double horn. Okay, next I'm going to show you an instrument called the mellophone. In a marching band, in a high school or college marching band, you don't want the French horn bells facing away from the audience. You want them facing towards the audience. And also the piston valves of the mellophone are a little easier to operate than the rotary valves of a French horn that spin in a circle. It also gives a brighter sound, which we want if we were playing in a marching band. Now, why does Langley own a mellophone when we don't have a marching band? Well, because this is a very easy instrument for a trumpet player to figure out how to play fast. And sometimes I need a trumpet player to play a horn part in a hurry, like for one particular song for a concert, or especially in pit orchestra for the middle school shows. So it's that French horn lower alto range, but more of a trumpet sound. Next, we're going to get to the trombones. This is the tenor trombone that I played in elementary school and middle school and into high school. And in high school, I added the bass trombone. I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, but this is pretty close to a trombone that our Langley trombonists would play. It wouldn't have the fancy leather stuff on it. I happen to have a plastic mouthpiece on right now, which is a little more comfortable to play than metal. And a beginner's trombone wouldn't have this weird curved brace here for the thumb. Trombones are unique because they have the slide. And the way the slide works is there's two inside tubes that stay put and a U-shaped outer tube that goes over that. Now that's kind of low for trombone. Trombones typically play in the same range that a tenor singer would. When I was in high school, I got into a summer camp of an orchestra, and they needed a bass trombone player. I didn't play bass trombone, but I managed to borrow one from a friend, and I went to the summer camp, and I learned to play bass trombone, and I fell in love with it. This is my main instrument. The bass trombone is a little bigger than the tenor trombone. This one has some extra tubing up here. Sometimes they even have 2 extra rotary valves. This one has 1. And it plays just like the trombone. It's got a slide, but it plays lower easier because the bore's a little thicker, a couple hundredths of an inch thicker. The bell is 9 inches instead of 8, and it plays bigger, lower sounds easier. And that's my main instrument, what I usually play. Next, we're going to get into baritone horns and euphoniums. It's an odd thing that different musicologists argue over the definition of baritone versus euphonium. Typically, baritones are a little smaller and have a little smaller bore and have a brighter sound. Euphoniums are a little bigger and have a darker sound. But they both play the same notes. Here is my baritone horn. Uses the same mouthpiece as trombone. This one happens to have 3 valves. So that's a baritone horn. The euphonium just a little bigger. This one happens to have 4 valves to play lower with. Little bigger sound. Next, we get the tubas. Hold on a second. This, try to get it all in the picture here, is actually a kid-sized tuba. This is what I would have a second year or a middle school player play. Just like violins, they come in 3/4 size, 4/4 size, and even bigger. This is a 3/4 size tuba. It plays really low. As I said, this is the tuba that I would have a middle schooler learn. But I also have my tuba. This is my tuba. It was made in England in about 1950, and it's big. This one happens to have the bell go forward. Sometimes they have the bell go straight up too. Just depends on what kind of sound you want. Thank you for listening to me today. I hope you learned a lot about the brasses, and maybe, just maybe, one of these years I'll be teaching some of you how to play a brass instrument. Thank you for being good listeners.